Hello, this is Poured Over, the Barnes& Noble podcast. My name is Chris Gillespie. My guest today is the author of 8 number 1 best-selling novels, including Angels and Demons, The Lost Symbol, Inferno, and The Da Vinci Code, which has sold over 80 million copies worldwide and is one of the best-selling books of all time. He's back again this September with a brand new book that just came out yesterday. It's in the hit Robert Langdon series, and it's entitled The Secret of Secrets, which I have right here with me. Please join me in welcoming to the show Dan Brown. Dan, how are you doing this afternoon?
Great, thanks. Great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for being here. I've been a fan of yours since I first read The Da Vinci Code as a teenager, so it's been so exciting for me to get a sneak peek at The Secret of Secrets, which is a classic Robert Langdon adventure, and in my mind, quintessential Dan Brown as a longtime reader. You've described it as the most intricately plotted and ambitious novel you've written to date. How does it feel that it's finally coming out and available to the public?
I'm so excited. I mean, part of it is that it really feels good to be done after 7 years, and that was 7 years nonstop. So it was a very hard book to write. I'm really excited about the way it turned out, and it's funny. You think the book works and you think it's good. You wouldn't hand it in if it weren't. But it's a relief to have it be read by so many reviewers and other people pre-pub who are just so excited about it. And you can breathe a sigh of relief and just say, okay, I guess a few people share my taste. So thank heavens for that.
A few people share your taste, yes. I think it is not surprising to hear that it took that long to write because reading it, I'm like, this must have taken so much time and effort, and it seemed like something that maybe you would have started even before the pandemic. Like, how soon after the previous Robert Langdon novel, Origin, did you start working on this new one?
Even sooner than you think, because I really started having an idea for this novel when I wrote The Lost Symbol. And there was a
Hmm.
character in there who was a noetic scientist, Katherine Solomon. And it's no secret, it's in the flap copy that she is part of this book. And if you've read my books, you know that Langdon, when it comes to love, is a pretty lucky guy. On every book, he
Hmm.
just meets some new, brilliant, beautiful woman who happens to know exactly what he needs them to know. But in this book, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to see Robert Langdon in love, and he's in a relationship. And when the book starts, he's in bed with a woman, and they're just waking up together, and you say, "Wow, this is a different Langdon." So that's been a lot of fun too.
And he's not just waking up anywhere. He's waking up in a classic Dan Brown location, a foreign city that's so rich with history and mystery and intrigue. This time around, they're in Prague.
Yeah, and when I knew I was going to write about human consciousness, I knew right from the start that this book had to be in Prague. Prague is the mystical center of Europe. In the days of Emperor Rudolph II, all of the mystics and scryers and Kabbalists, they all came to Prague to work for the emperor, who had this real fascination with talking to the dead. And so it's really just this mystical city, both historically and as far as the architecture. I'm somebody who likes to use location as a character,
Hmm.
and Prague features very, very heavily into the plot. And it was a lot of fun to research. Spent a lot of time in Prague.
I imagine I've never been to Prague, but having read the book, I am very eager to go visit now because it sounds such like a rich, beautiful place. How long did you actually spend over there?
In total, I'm not sure. I went many,
Hmm.
many times. So I mean, many months. And there's a lot to see there. And of course, you can't fit it all into a book. So there are some things that I saw that didn't make it in the book. But there were also some things I stumbled into that I thought, oh, I just, I have to see this. I have to put this in the book. The readers have to see this secret passage or this incredibly scary elevator or whatever it happens to be.
Hmm. And there's so many different locations and landmarks in the book where I'm like, it feels like such the perfect setting for a Robert Langdon adventure because I'm like, it's like almost like Prague was designed to be a
Right.
setting in your book. I'm like, this could not have worked out more perfectly. You did mention that you kind of had the idea before that you were going to start kind of returning to that idea of noetics and human consciousness. For the listeners at home who maybe aren't familiar with noetics, would you be able to? I know it's probably going to be hard to describe, but briefly, a brief overview of
Right.
noetics for the
Okay.
uninformed.
All I need is 800 pages. No, noetics, well, it comes from the Greek word noetica, which means perspective.
Hmm.
Noetics is the study of human consciousness, and it is really the study of how the human mind can affect the physical world. And that is sort of counter the way most of us think. You think the human mind can have no effect whatsoever on the material world. Mass cannot be affected by thought. As it turns out, that's not the case. I thought consciousness is going to be a tough
Mhm.
subject to talk about. It's so ethereal. It's like trying to get your arms around smoke. It's tough to manage. And I thought, how do I write a thriller about this? And the real challenge was figuring out how do you write a thriller and make it urgent and make it relevant when you're dealing with such an ethereal topic. That's one of the things that took me so long. But consciousness itself, we are in a mindset where our model of consciousness is something called local consciousness, and that is basically that all of the thoughts and hopes and dreams that you have as a person are the product of chemical processes in your brain. And these processes create your consciousness. That's how it feels to us, and that's how we've always thought of it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of anomalies to suggest that's not true. And we've all heard of people on operating tables who die and they're resuscitated and they say, no, no, I saw the whole thing. I was up on the ceiling, sort of looking down and watching, and this is what happened. That guy came in and this machine did this. And the person said, your eyes were taped shut. There's no way you saw this, but clearly they did. That is one of these anomalies that we say, well, that can't happen if consciousness is created in the mind. Sudden savant syndrome is another. You get hit in the head with a baseball and suddenly you speak Mandarin Chinese and you're from Tennessee.
Mhm.
These are the sorts of things that make us think, well, maybe we don't entirely understand consciousness. There was a time in the history of astronomy when we believed the Earth was the center of the solar system.
Mhm.
It was the model we had. It made sense to us, but there were anomalies in the sky that we couldn't figure out. And it wasn't until we abandoned that model and put the sun at the center that everything worked. I believe that that's exactly where we are with human consciousness. We are at that moment when we're going to discard the earth at the middle and we're going to bring the sun into the middle. And we're going to say, consciousness is not local after all. Something else is happening that's much more complicated and frankly, much more exciting than thinking that our brain is making consciousness. There's something else happening, and the book talks about it at length.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that was so fun to research in this book. And I should say, I mean, there's some pretty exciting and shocking bits of science in the book, experiments,
Mhm.
revelations. I started this book as a skeptic, didn't believe any of this, and was writing a book in this field, but really wasn't wasn't sure that any of this was going to make any sense. And 8 years after the fact, I've come out the other side a changed person with an entirely new perspective of how not only my mind works, but how reality works.
Hmm. And that's fascinating because it does, having read the book and learned all these things, it does kind of open your mind up in a way that I think one of the things that I really appreciate about all of your books, and especially thinking about it with the new book, is kind of like they are these expertly paced thrillers that function as a thrilling blockbuster style kind of adventure. But I think really for me, what kind of is like I was thinking about it like a candy bar kind of like the thriller is sort of like the chocolate coating and everything on the outside, but what really keeps me hooked is like that kind of existential exploration or that philosophical discussion that's kind of at the core of the book. And I want to keep reading because I want to know how certain mysteries play out or how the plot resolve, but I'm also like reading because I'm like I'm learning something about human existence in a way that I am not necessarily always getting that from other thrillers that are only functioning as a kind of cat and mouse tale.
Right. Well, then you entirely understand exactly what I'm trying to do, and that's thank you. That makes me happy that someone who reads as much as you do can see that immediately. One of the nicest compliments I was ever paid was by an old librarian who said, "You know what I like about your books? I feel like I'm eating vegetables, but it tastes like ice cream." I thought,
Yeah.
"That's you. Yes, that's it. You got it." That's pretty much exactly what you said. So thank you for that. I
And
mean, my first job is to entertain. Above all,
yeah.
these books have to be fun. They have to be the kind of book that you sit down thinking you're reading one chapter, and 10 chapters later, you're like, I just one more. And
Mhm.
that's what I aim to do above all. But, underneath all that, there has to be meat and there has to be something real. There has to be science and philosophy and things that actually you get to learn.
Hmm. And you are a writer and an artist who has a platform the size of, yeah, I mean, many writers do not have the size platform that you have. So really, your ability to kind of share these ideas with people you're giving a lot of weight to these things and kind of broadcasting them in a way that other writers cannot. So it's really fascinating that you're using your platform and your name and your brand to be able to share those ideas and things like that and kind of further the discussion overall, which I imagine there's going to be quite a bit of discussion that's going to come out
I
once people
hope
start
so.
reading.
I hope so. That's really one of the reasons I write these books. I love dialogue. When I wrote the Da Vinci Code, I actually didn't think it was going to be controversial, and that may sound naive, but I felt like I was asking a
Mhm.
perfectly reasonable question. What does it mean for Christianity if Christ is not the literal Son of God? Um, and there were a lot of people who got pretty upset by that question. I, every time I write a book, I think, well, nobody's going to be upset by this. And every time I write a book, I've managed to make somebody upset. So I'm not going to say anything about the secret of secrets. I'm sure somebody will be upset by it. Perhaps materialist scientists who really want to stay in the past. Uh,
Mhm.
who knows? We'll see.
I did enjoy there was a line because something that I've noticed in a lot of your books is that there's not a ton of references to the previous books, but they do, you kind of sprinkle in there for people who are attentive or who are longtime fans. And I remember there was one line in the new book where there's discussion of an upcoming manuscript that's coming out. And I think Robert Langdon is musing like the best way to make people read a book is for the Catholic Church to come out and say, don't read this book. And that has the exact opposite effect. And I was like, that reminds me of another
That's
novel
right.
that
That's right. Art imitating life, or vice versa. I'm not sure which.
Do you think that that level, I mean, you said that someone will probably find some way to be kind of shocked or maybe offended, but like thinking about that moment with the Da Vinci Code and how that exploded in a way that, you were saying that you didn't necessarily see coming, do you think that same level of controversy is like, can we achieve that now that we're 20 years you know, past the Da Vinci Code, and it's almost like I feel like with social media and everything, we're kind of in a constant state of outrage, and there's always things that are bombarding us. Like, is it possible for something to reach that same level of controversy now in 2025?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, my gut says no.
Hmm.
Yet, you mentioned social media, and we now have ways for anybody to be outraged and loud about it. You don't have to be the Vatican to be upset. The
Right.
Vatican happens to have a global, media arm. But now, your neighbor next door, has an international publishing deal just in his iPhone.
Hmm.
So, who knows? I mean, maybe it is possible to get outraged, and create some of that fervor. But that is absolutely not what I'm looking for. I really just want to write a book that gets people talking about human consciousness. And again, just saying, I forgot how fun it was to read. All I do is watch Netflix.
Yeah.
And somebody told me to read this book, and oh my God, I forgot I like reading. And now I'm going to get somebody else's book and read that. That's really always the nicest thing that I hear. Whether somebody reads The Secret of Secrets and says, I'm so fascinated by this topic, I want to go and read everything else in the world of nonfiction that's about human consciousness, or whether they say, I just want to read somebody else's thriller, or I want to read Dan's Backlist. I've never heard of him before.
Hmm.
One of the reasons that these books are written as standalone books is they take a long time to read, or to write rather. And
Hmm.
so, I it's been 8 years. I mean, Da Vinci Code was 20. My dog has just joined me. Winston, say hello.
Hey, Winston.
Hey, buddy, say hi. That's right. Um, so, um, so I want to. There are always people coming to my books as new readers who haven't read the other books.
Mm.
They've, there's, there are people who were 8 years old when my last book came out, and now they're 16 and saying, "What should I read?" I've never heard of Dan Brown. Who's that? And this is the book that's out. They don't have to sort of say, "Oh, I have to go back 8 books and read." No, you don't. You can jump in at any moment.
I think part of what, because I was having that same experience, like I said, like I think reading the Da Vinci Code when I was probably like 12 or 13 was kind of like a very formative experience for me because it was that kind of like you're no longer a kid necessarily, but you're not an adult. And so it's kind of like, and I think especially I mean, this is just my own feeling about it, but like for young men, there's not always a clear pipeline between like children's literature and adult literature. But I think that, and maybe I was a little bit precocious for reading the Da Vinci Code as a 12-year-old, but I think it was this kind of formative, like, oh, wow, and all of your books really, like, whenever I read them, I'm like, I always have that moment where I'm like so sucked in, and it's always kind of, I'm like, well, one more chapter. I'm like, how am I supposed to leave off there? So when I was reading the new book, I was looking forward to talking to you, but I was also cursing you because I'm like, I just got to go to bed, Dan. Like,
That's
just let me
right.
just let me sleep. I got to sleep, but okay, fine, I'll keep going. How,
I was on that topic. I was having a great conversation with Carlton Cuse, who's the producer and showrunner and writer of the Netflix series that we're going to make of this book.
mm,
And he said, usually when we adapt a book, we're always looking for some place to cut each hour of TV that's interesting and exciting. He goes, we can cut this anywhere. Like every single chapter. He goes, you've made our job so easy. Thank you so much. It was sort of a funny statement coming from another writer.
I also thought it was interesting too that there's a whole subplot in here about Penguin Random House as the publisher in the book, which I also know is the publisher for this book, The Secret of Secrets,
Yes.
and is your
Yeah.
publisher. How did they feel about being a part of the book, specifically in the context of them kind of experiencing a little bit of a security breach?
Yeah, that I will keep the bulk of those conversations private. Um, I think we all got to the place that we realized this is really fun. I mean, it's respectful. I mean, there were some things that were taken out for security reasons. I will tell you that, but I think everybody came to the point where we just realized, like, okay, with these edits, and there's nothing revealed that's going to put anybody in any sort of
Mm,
or any sort of IP in peril. I just thought, wow. I mean, book readers are um, you know, they're curious people. And I would think, wouldn't you be fascinated to have a thread that's inside a publishing company and you see how books are made, how they're chosen, how they're edited, how they're published, how they're kept secret. And so I thought, I really want to write this thread. And I could have made it a different publishing company or a fake one, but
mhm.
this seemed better.
And also, the Robert Langdon's editor in the story is also heavily inspired by, I think, your own editor. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So Jason Kaufman is my editor and has been since Angels and Demons. We've been together 30 years and
Mm,
I mean, just best friends, just we work really hard and really well together. He understands what I'm trying to do. And so I wrote this Jonas Falkman character who is Langdon's editor. And he just sticks his head up in the past books for, a page or two. And in this book, I just sort of fleshed him out as the vehicle to show the publishing company. And he laughed. He's just said, "It's very hard to edit myself." He's trying to edit these chapters, and he's like, I'm not that funny. I said, "You're pretty funny." That's
Um, Thinking about Robert Langdon too, like I was wondering, since you've been writing him for decades at this point, like how your relationship with him, as the character, has evolved over that time. Because I imagine that when you were first writing Angels and Demons, you probably were not thinking that you were going to be still having this kind of conversation with Robert Langdon 25 years in the future.
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote Angels and Demons, it was a standalone. Robert Langdon was just this character I created. And actually, after Angels and Demons, I was so exhausted of, Vatican secrets and Renaissance art and architecture. I went and wrote a book called Deception Point, which is, set in the Arctic Circle,
Mm,
as far from the Vatican as possible. And when I went to write my next novel, there was something about Langdon that called me back. I'm not sure what it was, but I kind of missed him. I'd written a whole novel about other characters that I enjoyed, but Langdon was calling me back, and I realized I was going to be spending a lot more time with him. Of course, he hadn't sold any books. My first three books were commercial failures: Digital Fortress, Angels and Demons, and Deception Point. At the time they came out, they sold no copies. I mean, very,
mm,
very few. And so when I wrote the Da Vinci Code, um, and I remember reading, I turned it in and we edited it, and about a month went by and they were working on it, and I got the advanced reading copy and I sat down and I read it and I thought, if this book doesn't work, I need to stop writing because this is exactly the book that I would want to read. And even back then, I understood that, look, when you're a writer or a musician or a chef, any creative person, all you have to guide yourself is your taste, your own taste, and you write the book or create the painting or create the souffle that you want to eat or look at or read. And then you just sort of hope that people share your taste. To that point, it seemed like nobody shared my taste. And fortunately, for a number of reasons, the Da Vinci Code got a wonderful launch from Doubleday. They just did an amazing job publishing that book, and it met enough of an audience that it caught fire and took off. And the irony and the good thing to know for any young writers who are watching your show is that these other three books that didn't sell any copies, I never changed a single word. Every one of them went to number one. Um,
mm.
So you may have something of value just because it's not a commercial success at this moment in history doesn't mean it's not of value, doesn't mean it can't be a success. And just keep writing, keep getting better, and keep writing.
I was also wondering about how your what that experience was like coming out of the Da Vinci Code mania, and then when it's time for you to write your next book, how did that affect your experience from a creative perspective? Like, I imagine when you were gearing up to write The Lost Symbol, that was there, it must have been was it a lot of pressure? If that were me, I
Uh,
would just be like, I would just be a nervous wreck of being, but like, how do I top, how do I top
yeah,
this?
well, so you're psychic. Yeah, that's what happened. I sat, I looked at, I would type a sentence. I go, millions of people are going to read that. I don't like that as a first sentence. And I spent about 2 weeks being very self-aware
Mm,
uh, and crippled by it. In the same way that, you know, an athlete or musician, you can't think about how to swing a baseball bat or how to bow a violin. It just has to happen. And writing's the same way. You can't be self-aware when you're writing. And I was. And at some point I thought, wait a minute, all I did was just write the book that I would want to read. That's all I did those first 4 times. So
hmm
just do that again. And suddenly I was fine. And I just thought, okay, I'm writing just for me. If other people choose to read this, great. But I'm really just writing for myself. Of course, that was only half of the challenge. The other challenge is your life has just been turned upside down. Everybody suddenly knows who you are. You are dealing with all sorts of things. You're dealing with making movies and traveling the world to promote your books and international, everything. So it was a distracting, difficult time to write. And The Lost Symbol, I always imagined would be my most difficult book. When I finished it, I thought I
mm.
would never have a book that's as difficult as this one. That was before The Secret of Secrets. So, we have a new winner. Um, uh, but what's sort of interesting is that the challenges with this book were intellectual challenges. They weren't, my life was peaceful. I was confident in what I was doing. I didn't, I'd written books after the Da Vinci Code, and I was fine. It was really the question of how to take this incredibly interesting and rich topic of human consciousness and weave it into a thriller in a way that you would want to keep turning pages while you were learning, not even realizing you were learning. And ideally, uh, your journey as a reader would be Langdon's journey as a protagonist, which was my journey as the writer, which is starting at a point of skepticism and ending up at this point going like, wait a minute, that's kind of maybe that's right. And that's the experience I had writing the book.
That's like one of the things that I love too about your books and like reading them is that, like I was saying before, about like they're thrillers, which keeps me, just like entertained. And you're like, ooh, what's going to happen? And there are awesome twists in it. Like we're keeping things spoiler free for the listener because we want them to go experience it and pick up their own copy at Barnes and Noble. But there's so many twists and just throughout that are so exciting. But also your books, like when you're done reading them, I feel like I have this sense of like the same kind of thing, like sort of like when you're younger and you're having a sleepover with your friends and you're just talking about like the big mysteries of life and you're just kind of allowing all that. Like I feel like I have that same effect when I put your book down for the night and I'm laying there in my bed in the dark and I'm just like, I feel like I'm
That's great. I love to hear that. That's fantastic.
And the lost symbol is kind of, I think you'd mentioned it before, like there is connective tissue between the Lost Symbol and this new one. Readers don't have to have read the Lost Symbol to understand the Secret of Secrets, but a big part of that connective tissue is the character of Katherine Solomon, who you said before is in a relationship with Robert Langdon when we pick up the book. Out of all of the characters and I guess former romantic interactions, shall we say, that Robert Langdon has had over the years, what about Katherine Solomon was the one that like what made you bring her back out of all the other characters and kind of
Well,
be the matchmaker for the
yeah.
two of them?
Well, a couple things. One is she's a noetic scientist, and I wanted to write about
Hmm
consciousness. That's sort of the nuts and bolts answer. But the emotional answer is that she and Langdon have had a platonic attraction and a friendship for many, many years. And it's something that grew into a romance just at the beginning of this book. And it seemed much more interesting to have Langdon be in love at the beginning of a relationship. But it's hard to be in love with somebody you just met.
hmm
So the relationship had depth, but it had just turned a corner and become romantic. And the most exciting part of a relationship to read about, I would imagine, would be the beginning. When everything's still super fresh and they're just excited to get to know each other. And that's really why I chose Catherine. She's a couple years older than Langdon, and she's his intellectual equal, and in many cases his superior. So that's sort of fun to watch too. That the savvy professor who has every answer has to sort of say, actually, Catherine, yeah, you got a point. I screwed that one up. So it's kind of funny.
A big part of Robert Langdon as a character too is his photographic memory and his ability to solve codes and puzzles. And are you as good with codes and puzzles as he is, or where does that come from in him?
I have a passion for codes and puzzles. We grew up in my family. My parents didn't want to have a television,
Mm.
so I grew up without a TV, and they said you're going to learn how to play music and read. And we also did a ton of puzzles and codes. My dad's a mathematician, which is a symbolic language. My mom's a musician, which is a symbolic language. I just grew up in a world of treasure hunts and codes, and I just always thought they were fun. Langdon's much better at them than I was. I had a very funny thing happen to me. I was on Czech TV a few years ago on live television, and they handed me a little puzzle called Weasel in a Cage. And it's this weird little box with this ball in it that spikes that it's impossible to get the ball out.
Uh,
They handed it to me and they said, this is our famous Czech puzzle, Weasel in a Cage, and you can take this home and try to get this out. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I just went like this, and it came out. And nobody could believe it had happened. And I thought, oh, well, this must be a joke or something. So they put it back in, and I said, okay, well, I'll just take it out when I get home. I've been trying it for about 10 years. I can't get it out. It was just this weird, lucky moment. And
huh.
so in the Czech Republic, I have a reputation of someone who can solve a code instantly, but I got to admit, it was dumb luck. Maybe they handed it to me primed or something. I don't know. But to this day, it's on my shelf, and I haven't been able to get the weasel out of the cage. So
From a writing perspective, how do you craft the puzzles that Robert Langdon is facing? Because I imagine it must be kind of tricky to toe the line between like, oh, the reader's not going to be able to ever figure this out, but you kind of have to do it in a way where it's like it has to be inevitable but also surprising once the answer
yeah.
is revealed. How do you like gauge that? How do you sense that?
Yeah, well, the first and most important thing about putting a puzzle in a book is that the puzzle has to be relevant to the plot.
Hmm.
That's number one. It can't just be for fun. It's got to be. There has to be some stakes to the puzzle. It's in the old James Bond model. You got to figure out which wire to cut,
Hmm.
or else the whole world explodes. So it has to be relevant, and it also, I really feel like um, it has to be really simple once you see the answer.
Mm.
The best twists are always the twists where the reader goes, "Oh my God, it was right in front of me the whole time." And there's a couple big twists in this book, and I worked very, very hard, such that the vast majority of readers, when they get there, would go, "What? Oh, of course, it's obvious." What you don't want to have happen is the reader to go, "Wait, what? I,
Right.
That's impossible. I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense." Or what's equally bad is somebody said, "Yeah, I knew that 200 pages ago. You didn't fool me." So you've got to walk that fine line where you've dropped just enough breadcrumbs that when you say, "No, it's right there," that people go, "Oh, obviously it's there. I just didn't see it." I think that's the same way with codes and puzzles, that you have to create puzzles that once Langdon solves them through, giant mental gyrations that most of us couldn't possibly do, we go, "Oh, yeah, actually, that makes sense. Perfect sense."
And one of the biggest twists and kind of surprises in the book, I think, does that exact thing where, and I'm going to describe this without really giving out any details about it, but I was reading it and I'm like, well, I think this is it, right? Like, obviously, I'm like, well, no, it seems like it's too obvious. I'm like, well, what? No, it can't be. I'm like, well, it's got to be. And then it was not, and it was something else. And I was like, that was there the whole time. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, part of tricking a reader is creating um, a red herring that
Mm,
smart readers go, "Well, like that's too much of a red herring. It can't be that." And
hmm.
then, maybe there's some ancillary thing floating over here that the readers go like, "You know what? He wants me to think it's that, but it's that." And the reality is it's neither of them. It's something you didn't see coming. And
Hmm.
that's a lot of trial and error to get it right. Not, you can't drop too many breadcrumbs and you can't leave people in dark. So it's part of the fun of what I do.
obviously the present moment is all about the new book, Secret of Secrets, and you're going to be, I'm sure, doing a lot of press. I know you're going on a big book tour doing it, going across Europe. How do you think European audiences respond differently than audiences here in America?
To be honest with you, they don't respond differently at all.
Hmm.
These books are set in Europe, and
Hmm.
they're about European history, and it's crazy to think that more than 75% of my readership is overseas. If you can imagine that. I mean, my following is much bigger overseas than it is in the U.S. I'm not sure whether that's because these books are set overseas, or we spend more time watching Netflix. I don't know. But uh, I don't think the response is different at all. Readers like to read,
Hmm.
and they like stories. And really, it doesn't matter where a story's set. If it's well told, we all like all sorts of different stories, as long as they're told well and they resonate. The thing love most about The Secret Secrets is it's relevant to all of us.
Hmm.
Um, what you learn in this book, it doesn't matter how old you are, where you live, how much money you have, what you do for a living. This is relevant to you. The way your mind works is incredibly relevant to the way you live your life.
And you tackle so many huge mysteries and concepts in the book. It's hard to the fact that they're all able to be connected sort of by the unifying themes in the book is just so fascinating. And I was wondering how, you're going to be doing the book tour. There's the Netflix show that they're going to be adapting, but do you have an idea of what is in the future for Robert Langdon? Like, do you know how many more books that you would like to write, or do you not necessarily think about your career in that kind of abstract way?
Um, I kind of feel like talking about a next book is a little bit like, I don't know, if do you have children?
I do not know.
Okay. Well, if you can imagine, your wife has just given birth, you're in the delivery room, and you're standing over her bed. She's hugging her newborn. She's exhausted. You say, you know what? So what do you think, honey? Should we do this again? What are you thinking? It's not I'm not in the headspace to
R-
talk about another Langdon. I have I have a lot of ideas, um, and I don't have a lot of time.
Sure.
Just because these books take so long, so I won't be able to write them all unless we, I guess, figure out how to keep people alive a very, very, very long time. So it's nice to have a lot of ideas. But we have limited time in our lives. We'll see what's next. I have a feeling I know what's next, but not ready to talk about it.
No, of course not. And you deserve to take a well-deserved break after writing The Secret of Secrets, which I'm sure is going to be another enormous hit. Listener, I can't speak highly enough about this book. Dan, you've been so generous with your time. I know that we're just about out of time. So, like I said, I had so much fun reading The Secret of Secrets. It's been a really fun experience, a really nostalgic experience for me in a lot of ways. And it just sucks you in, and it grabs you, and it is just gripping. And I'm hard pressed to think of another book that has engrossed me so thoroughly in recent years, and also been so thought provoking. So I really appreciate it, and it's been wonderful getting to speak with you today.
Chris, thank you. And I've always had a great relationship with Barnes and Noble. You guys feel like family, and I'm actually launching this book tour at the Union Square Barnes and Noble. So
Yeah.
it's just in a few weeks. Can't wait to be there, and appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. And listener, The Secret of Secrets is available now at your local Barnes & Noble store and online at bn.com. Make sure you pick up a copy today and then clear your calendar because once you start reading it, you're not going to be able to put it down, and it's going to become a fixture in your life until you do. So, Dan, have a great rest of the day. Best of luck with the new book.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.